Hi everyone, my name is Joy Lowen, CEO at the National Screen Institute.
And I'm Kai Wheeler, Program Manager for NSI Digidocs and CBC New Indigenous Voices. We're coming to you from Treaty 1 territory.
We're sad we can't be with you in person this year, but know that we're there with you in spirit and proud to present this masterclass. Features NSI alumni, Tasha Hubbard, as well as program faculty member, Elmaya Tailfeathers.
Our NSI and Digidocs and CBC New Indigenous Voices students are participating as delegates this year at imagineNATIVE for the first time, and we can't think of better role models. These talented women have used their strong voices to share important stories around the world with integrity and passion.
So congratulations, Team imagineNATIVE, and happy festival to all.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elmaya Tailfeathers, and I'm so happy to be joining you here today with Tasha Hubbard. Thank you to imagineNATIVE for hosting us and having this event. I really want to applaud the programmers and staff at imagineNATIVE for managing to navigate this difficult terrain. It's quite heartbreaking that we can't gather in person at imagineNATIVE this year. I know it's really important event for all of us. It nourishes the heart and the spirit, and I'm happy that we get to gather in this way. So it's an absolute honor to be sitting here with you today, Tasha. You've been a friend and mentor for many years now, and I'm so grateful for all of your guidance and support over the years. And I jumped at the opportunity to be able to chat with you in this way today. So I think maybe we could start with how you got your start. So I know that that you started working in narrative film as in background. How is it that you found your way to documentary?
So my dad used to be an actor in the 70s and 80s, and had friends from, you know, that are in Indigenous film, and he took my sisters and I to a Dream Speakers Festival in Edmonton in 1997, and we met Tantu Cardinal, which we were really thrilled about. And then my dad said, "Oh, hey, there's my old friend Gil," and it was Gil Cardinal, the late Gil Cardinal. And I had an English degree at that point. I was doing some teaching. I was doing arts administration, and I was trying to figure out what it was I wanted to do. And you know, when I said to my dad, "Do you think he would talk to me about film?" And he said, "Sure." And, you know, and so Gil did. He came with me and we sat outside and, you know, talked about what the possibilities were and why he did what he did, and, you know, the power of our stories and the importance of us telling them. And he told me that, you know, he was starting on this movie series called Big Bear. And I just got excited because, you know, I was in a process of recovering my history and recovering, you know, a sense of who I was as someone who'd been adopted out. And, you know, I just thought this would be amazing to work in this space, to learn and but also to contribute into bringing the story forward. So he told me, I can't promise anything, you know, you'd have to talk to one of the producers. And I said, sure. And one of the producers was Doug Cuthand, who lived in the city I lived in at the time, Saskatoon. And, you know, I just went to meet him, gave him my resume, and he's like, oh, we don't have anything, you know, and he puts it on this stack of other resumes. I'm like, okay, you know. So I would go back. I'd stop in on him like every month. I'd just stop in and like, hi, you know, just seeing if anything's happening. And he was like, you know, and he knew who I was. He knew my family too, but you know, he's like, okay, well, we'll see. And but then he found my resume and he actually read it. This, you know, I left, and he called me a while later and he's like, I see you speak French. And I'm like, yeah, because I'd spent a couple summers in Quebec and the co-production was with a Montreal production company. So he said, would you be able to help me talk to the production office in Montreal? Like, yeah, I can do that. So he's like, well, I got money for a contract for you. I'm like, okay. So I started that, and then they needed help with casting. The Montreal casting director came out and wanted help. And I actually had plans to go with my friends to Brandon, Manitoba Winter Festival, where there's, you know, a powwow and a hockey tournament and all of these. And, you know, because I was in my 20s and, you know, I was, you know, didn't have children and would just travel around. And I called my friends and I'm like, I can't go. And they were kind of upset with me because, you know, we were supposed to leave that day. And I'm like, no, I got to stay. Because I just knew, like, this is an opportunity, like, to help this casting director, to learn more about what the industry is about, you know, and that, you know, I had that sense, like, that means I have to give some things up. And, you know, and I, you know, my friends and I still kind of laugh about that. They're like, oh, we were just mad at you the whole way, you know. You know, because, you know, you're 20 years old and splitting the bill 3 ways meant a bit of difference, right? But yeah, so she taught me how to cast, and then they ended up bringing me on as background casting, and I spent 3 months on, you know, working on that project. And what was amazing was Gil and the producers created this space that was ahead of their time, where, you know, the film hierarchy was not as, you know, rigid as it is on a lot of sets, where there was a lot of collaboration happening. And, you know, people were treated with respect, and that included the background. And, you know, I was bringing in respected elders and, you know, community leaders to come and stand in the background to, you know, to be a part of this project that we were all excited about. And, you know, Gil and Lake Gordon, Tatusis, and others were, you know, they just wanted to create that space. And I thought all film sets were like that. It was my first project. And then the next one I worked on, I'm like, what is going on? Like,
Must have been a very rude awakening.
Totally. But at the end of the film, Doug came to me and said, you know, you've done really good work here, and, you know, are you interested in learning how to make documentaries? And I said, yeah, I am. And he's like, okay. And, you know, he had a production company, but he said, I don't have enough to, like, give you a salary like that. I don't, you know, it doesn't work that way for us. He said, but I can bring you on to, you know, to my projects, and I'll make sure you don't starve. Because he's got this dry humor, right? I was like, okay, that sounds good. You know, but I mean, very quickly, like, you know, he was really encouraging, and within a year I was co-directing with him, and, you know, definitely didn't starve, and was, yeah, just thrown into it to learn.
So, what was the moment that led you to the decision to tell the story in two worlds colliding? I remember seeing it at an Indigenous women's health conference in Calgary back in 2008, and you were there, and it was long before, it was a few years before I made my first film, and it was before I had even, you know, thought about the possibility of making my own films. And I remember seeing you there and seeing the film and just being so blown away by you and your work, and I think that sort of helped plant the seed for me, seeing you do it. But what was the moment that you decided to tell that story? It's a very difficult story. It was a risky story to tell. So what was that moment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really amazing. You were there. So Doug and I had a sort of process where I did a lot of the story like research and scouting for stories and projects, and I would develop them, and I would do that while he was editing the project that we had just finished, kind of thing. And so I think I'd been working with him for 2 years, and we were on our way to do a shoot on residential schools, and I heard on the radio that the Saskatoon chief of police was going to hold this press conference, and that a complaint had come forward about a man, you know, who had been left out in the wind, you know, at the power station, and left to walk back. And what had happened a couple of weeks before that is that a friend of mine, whose dad worked at FSIN, we were in his office, and we were told that a family that she was close to had just lost their son, and he was found at the power station frozen to death. And they felt that the circumstances were suspicious, but the police were telling them that he'd committed suicide and he'd walked out there, and it didn't sit right with the family. And so I had already knew that there was something happening because of that. So when I heard about the press conference, I was like, oh my God, you know, and I turned to Doug and I said, you know, we should follow this. Like this, you know, and I just had that feeling that I didn't even understand what it was at that time, but I just had, like, I could just feel it in kind of the middle of my chest, where I'm like, this is something. And, you know, I'd already been really looking at the way mainstream media would cover our stories, and you know, how the bias that would come into that, and how we would be, you know, the stereotypes that would be used, and how they, you know, wrote about our people. And that's what I said, you know, if the story isn't followed, like, it's just going to be the mainstream narrative that's out there. So we should do something. And Doug said, no, you should do this. He said, it's, you know, it's time for you to do your own projects, and I can support you, but, you know, you should do this. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I called some crew, and, you know, like, can you be, because we were on our way, like, we couldn't turn around. We were interviewing elders, and, you know, but I said to the crew, can you go to the press conference and get some footage? And it started from there. Yeah.
Wow, what an incredible story to be telling for your first film. It's a lot to take on, and a feature film nonetheless. So your work is about justice in so many ways, but you do such an incredible job of showing the humanity of individuals who are impacted by injustice. I'm just so blown away by your process and the way that you take such care of the individuals you work with. I want to know about what that journey was like, in terms of you know, over a decade later, telling a story that in some ways probably felt a little bit like deja vu for you. you took a much more personal stance with Nîpawistamâsowin than you did with Two Worlds Colliding. And in a lot of ways, you're kind of you keep a distance from the story, from your participants in Two Worlds Colliding. But it's very evident that you were there with them, offering care and support in telling their families' stories. But what was that decision like to step in a very personal way with Nîpawistamāsowin?
Yeah, so I had 2 years of development with Two Worlds Colliding, and I approached the NFB because I had worked with them a little bit with the projects Doug had with them. And, you know, there was a story editor on that film who was convinced that the story was me, like was convinced that, you know, me as, you know, Cree and from the community, but, you know, adopted and having been raised, that it was sort of the story was me and my two communities, and what does this young girl do with that? And, you know, like that kind of, and behind the scenes, sure, like I was really, it was hard, you know, I was really like unpacking and, you know, pulling back the layers of my own miseducation, you know, of my own sort of socialization that I had grown up with as someone who'd been in white community my entire childhood. And so I was already like having these moments of like, oh no, not this, right? And like doing that in the process of the research, and of course like being confronted with the enormity of what had been done and how. So I was already doing that, but at that point I'm like, but it isn't about me, you know, it isn't about me. This is about what, you know, the community I live in and the people in my community, and it's not about me. And I couldn't see how bringing my story in would help tell that story, right?
Yeah.
So I refused, and it was made things a longer process, but that's okay. With this film, it's not that I felt that the story of what Colton's family was going through was any less. It was, you know, it was just as urgent and important and all of those things. It was just that it was the fact that when I heard the news, the first thing I did was, you know, look at my children, you know, and I had my son and my nephew in the vehicle with me when I heard. And, you know, of course, you know, I was heartbroken for, you know, Colton's mother, who I hadn't met at that point, you know, heartbroken for Jade, who I did know, you know, she's married into my family, you know, and the horror and the shock of it. But there was just this visceral, like, fear that I know I was not alone in feeling.
Mm.
And I think that Colton's murder had that impact on you know, on all of us, right? And I started to see the way, you know, telling this story as a parent, as a mother to boys who, you know, you know, my son's 13 now, he's already 5'10", you know, we just went to the vet to get his kitten shots, and the vet told him to walk out because only one adult at a time. And I'm like, he's 13. Oh, we thought he, you know, they thought he was an adult already, but that's the perception, right? Of Indigenous boys. They're seen as men before their time, right? And so that was all swirling around as I started to think about, you know, the possibility of doing a film on this. So but it wasn't done lightly, because I was always concerned, like, I don't want my story to take away or overpower or deflect. I want whatever I do with my story to amplify, you know, the situation, to amplify what happened to Colton, and, you know, to, you know, use the other thing is, of course, you know, I grew up on a farm. I grew up around farmers, and that was another early thought I had was, you know, when I grew up around guns, like, you know, we did not have loaded handguns hanging around, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was, you know, we always had we always had at least one gun, if not more, but like there was such care taken around them, you know. And I've told this story a few times, but I didn't tell it in the film. But like, I remember we would get given toy guns. I remember pointing my toy gun at my brother, and oh my God, did I get in trouble? You know, just a toy.
Yeah.
But there was that like ethic around guns in my family that I was like, how did we go from that to this family who just the first thing they do is run for their guns and start, you know, shooting them off? And you know, that was, you know, that was something too. I'm like, oh, like, you know, I think it was just such a wake up call, you know. I think we'd been seeing the signs of the way in which, you know, people were being politicized towards gun violence and towards that culture. And I think what happened to Colton really, you know, solidified that for us. And I wanted to be able to talk about that and, you know, use my positionality to open that up. So yeah, so that you know, we did film, and I you know, of course talked to Debbie and Jade about it. And you know, Debbie was really profound about it because she's like, no, they need to be part of it. This all needs to be part of it. And you know, she said, you know, your boy and Oskaya, they're the future, and that's what this is about, and this is why we're doing what we're doing, you know. And she's like, it's too late for our family and for Colton. Like we need to do all of this so that it doesn't happen to these boys. And it's like, okay, you know. But you know, the first time I showed them the film, and you know, that was the tough part of editing. And the editing was like how to get the balance right of the main narrative, which is, of course, this family and what they're going through, and the way in which the system, you know, does its job and pushes them out. You know, and then, you know, weaving in the history that we see that this is, you know, not isolated, that this is absolutely part of a pattern of colonial violence. And then my own, you know, story and in that. And, you know, when I started, my producer was like, I'm going to trust you. I can't quite see how this is going to work. I'm going to trust you. And I'm like, okay, I can do this. You know, it was so and then I actually had a moment in editing where I like, you know, I'm crying with the editor. I'm like, I don't know if I could do this. Like, you know? I'm like, maybe I can't, you know. And I was thinking back to that conversation, you know, but I mean, I had an amazing team, and you also worked with the same editor. I mean, it was, we found our way through it. But the first time I showed it to Jade and Debbie, I definitely was like, I hope I got it right. I hope that, you know, they feel like my story and what, you know, that it brings these issues forward. And, you know, and they felt that way. It was, you know, and Debbie's like, I want to meet your grandpa. You know, I want to sit at that table and talk to your grandpa and, you know, have a conversation. And I like him. He's an okay guy, you know, like it was okay. Okay, we're good, you know. Yeah.
Well, okay, I have so many questions. I want to make sure that this is a clear path.
Long answers. So.
No, this is fantastic. I think what's evident in the way that you're talking about Jade and Debbie is that you take a very collaborative approach in working with the individuals you work with and whose stories you're telling. I feel like Birth of a Family is almost a bridge between two worlds colliding and Nîpawistamâsowin. I watched Birth of a Family. I watched them all again recently, but I watched Birth of a Family again last night, and I just cried through the whole thing because it's such a beautiful portrait of a family moving through such a big story, you know. It's about what happens on a micro level with this family. And I think many documentary filmmakers who are not from the communities from which, from the story from which they tell these stories, have the opportunity to kind of walk away at the end of the day, and that it's often I just maybe just a means of moving forward through their careers as filmmakers. But I think with marginalized voices, filmmakers who come from marginalized communities, we don't necessarily have that freedom and liberty. You know, these stories are our community stories, our family stories, and they're our stories. And with you, it's, like I said, so evident that you take on this really beautiful collaborative approach with the people you work with. I know that you co-wrote with Betty Ann. Can you talk about that process of care and collaboration, and ensuring that those that you work with are happy with the story that's been told at the end of the day?
For sure. So, so in 2015, I was running out of time to finish my dissertation. I pushed all the extensions to the max, and so my supervisor had elicited, you know, this sort of promise that I would focus on my academic stuff, and so I was trying to do that. And Betty Ann, I had met Betty Ann during Two Worlds Colliding, because she had covered it as a journalist. And we had both had some weird things happen after the film and after the story, in terms of, you know, Saskatoon's small and everybody knows who everybody is, and the police know who everybody is. And we'd had some weird dealings. And so we had kind of bonded over that. And then she had asked if we could work to put on an anniversary screening of Two Worlds Colliding. So we worked together more closely. So I had told her at that time, you know, as a journalist, you have a really good sense of story. And if you ever think about making a film, like, let me know. Like, you know, I'm happy to give advice or guidance or introductions and things like that. And she's like, sure. And then she didn't tell me about this at that time, but she had already this was already in the works of finding her siblings and bringing them together. And she had met Marie Wilson from the TRC, and Marie had said to her, who's going to document this? Like, this is really amazing, is what you're doing here. And so she remembered our conversation and asked to take me for coffee and told me what was going to be happening. And I think this was in May. And she was planning on having them come in July. And she's like, do you think this would be a film? And I was like, oh my God, yes. Like, this has not happened yet. You know, the you know, possibility of, you know, if your family's comfortable, of like following, you know, what happens and over the time you're together, it's you know, it'll be really powerful. And she's like, yeah, I've been thinking about it. And so I said to her, well, you could do this. And, you know, I did say, like, you're going to need to have a really strong creative producer or a co-director, because you're going to be so focused on, you know, your family and coming together, but it's possible. And I said, you know, this is something the NFB would really like. Like, I think this is a story, you know, that they would get behind. And I happened to be going to Hot Docs, and I said, you know, I'll talk to them about it there. So I pitched a project I wanted to do down the line. I was sort of not listening to my supervisor already. And then I pitched this one, but for Betty to direct. And the NFB was like, we love that, you know, we're going to pass on your first one. I'm like, oh. But we really like this one. And, you know, but they had concerns, and it, in the end, they were absolutely right. They had concerns about how stretched Betty Ann would be that week to both be in the film and have this momentous occasion, and then have to, like, remove herself periodically to work on the film element. And they said, so we'd like you to do it. Like, we think and is there a way you and Betty Ann could work together? And well, then I felt awkward, right? Because I had gone telling her, like, I'm, you know, so anyway, I mean, the main thing is having honest conversations. And I like, sat her and I'm like, okay, so this is what happened, and I, I'm like, I'm not trying to insert myself. In fact, I'm not supposed to be doing any work right now. Like, but this is what they said. And so she was like, would you consider doing it? And I'm like, if you wanted me to. But I said to her, but this is your story, and I don't want to feel like it's being taken, because she is her own storyteller. This is her story, and it's a story, this 30-year journey. She had talked to other journalists about it, and they had could we tell this story? And she's like, no, it's mine, it's my story. And like, her hands will even go like this is my story. And it's like, that's it. Like, so I'm like, if I'm going to do this, I have to treat it like that. Like it's that precious, and so I told her like this, that's what I'll do. Like I'll treat that story like it is important, and it is your story. And, can we co-write it? Can you come on as, and have a hand in it? So we worked it out that, she, I wanted the film to just follow what happened that week, and I didn't want to script it, and I didn't want to have to interrupt them and with like, can you go through the door again? Like those kind of things I didn't want. So I made the case for 2 cameras, and I'm like, and I said, we're just going to have to keep up. Like, if we miss something, we miss something. It'll be only be our fault. Like, and I said, I'm not going to ask them to like do things again. I'm not going to do that. And, few times we had to say, just give us 5 minutes, we're like running around trying to get everything. But, for the most part, we didn't hold them up. And, but Betty Ann just told me, this is what I'm going to do. These are the things I'm thinking about. Bev, do you know any other things? So I just listed all the different things I knew of, because I used to live there. And she's like, okay. And then the only thing I asked, I said, when you bring out the files and the story of your trying to find them and, those sorts of things, I just said, can you wait and do that further in and not the second night, And because she understood story so deeply, she's like, right. Because then where would we go after that? I'm like, right. She's like, yeah, that's okay. She's like, maybe it's better we just spend time together before we get into the heavy stuff. And I'm like, yeah. And, so, I mean, we collaborated that way and then the rest of it was just her letting us know, like, we're going to go here today in the morning, and so it would be like, okay. And we had an on-site production manager who would then rush to wherever they were going and get permissions, because we didn't know what they were doing.
Wow. In one of the busiest tourist havens in the world.
Yeah. No, and so, there's things they did that we couldn't follow, so they couldn't be part of the story. But, that the trip to the skywalk, I mean, that was like some fancy footwork from the producer, Bonnie Thompson, who was there with us, and the production manager working as a team to get permissions. And,
wow.
And then we just kept up with them. So she had, I mean, she was also clear though that this was a documentary, right? That this, there was going to be moments where things got raw and honest, and to be okay with that, and the process of being vulnerable. And that's hard, right? It's hard. And yet she knew, like, for being a journalist, like, this is the story, this is the truth of the story, right? And so there was never any like, can you gloss over that, or can you not, it was just, it always sort of felt odd, right? When you're telling when I was doing film before, that, you're telling people's story, and they have to just trust that you're going to do that in a good way. And, what happens when the teller of the story doesn't do that in a good way, and and people don't have a say in that. And I understand Western documentary tradition and what it is and how it works, but when our representation as Indigenous people has been so misrepresented, and the framing, and how a filmmaker sets that tone, right? The film takes people where the filmmaker wants them to go. And if you're coming, and this is why I'm such an active proponent for us telling our own stories, if you're coming from a place of bias and from a place of having not questioned the ideas you have around Indigenous people and all of that, like, you are going to set the tone and the frame that perpetuates the problem, which isn't us. Like, I always say that we are not the problem. Indigenous people are not the problem, right? Colonialism is the problem.
Mm-hmm.
We're just trying to live through that, right? So Betty, I mean, for her, it was more like, just, we had so much footage, how do we best tell the story? And she was really amazing at that. Like, this is important. And I think, but she, she didn't try to change things, from what they were. And, when I showed her the rough cut, she was like, this is how I remember it happening, I'm like, okay, good, we're good then, So, yeah. So, but yeah, I think it worked well for that reason. And and I think because of that, her understanding of story, like, it would have been silly to not involve her on that level. Yeah.
Yeah. And you did very much the same thing with Nîpawistamâsowin in terms of collaborating.
They although a little different, because we did show them an early cut, and it was more for me, like, they didn't want, I mean, they're going through this in horrific situation. So in that case, they did have to trust me, and we spent a lot of time. I spent a lot of time with them, and Jade already knew me, which helped. But it was like, this is who I am. This is what I want to do. I explained to both Debbie and Jade the way I wanted to weave in history and what was happening to them, and then how I wanted to use my own story to tell this. And they were on board with that, but they didn't see anything until we were close. But for me, it was around, I just wanted them to feel like this was accurate, and that, and like I said earlier, that my story, that I'd found that balance of using my story to sort of open up and challenge viewers around this issue. Mm-hmm. So they were really open to that, and gave their blessing. Where it's been more collaborative has been the distribution, right? And so we've worked with them, in terms of I took them on a tour. The film won money at Hot Docs, and so we used that money to travel the entire family on the theatrical release. So not every single one, because we couldn't all, but I brought we brought them to Hot Docs, but we also took them to Regina and Edmonton and Saskatoon, and to be able to be a part of this and to speak to their own experience of the film, and but also just to be able to tell their story directly around Colton. And part of the film was about, and this is what is I struggle with, is like how frustrating it is to have to humanize. Our people shouldn't have to prove our humanity. you know, but in the end, that's what it's about, because so many people don't see us that way. They don't see us as fully human, and with all of our complexities and all of our beauty and all of our challenges, like we don't get seen that way. And you know, so my films talk about that. Like Mary Wagner got to talk about her son, and you know, that he was loved and that he was a good uncle, and that, you know, all of these things. And Debbie had that opportunity to talk about Colton, and you know, that, you know, that he loved to read, and that, you know, he had plans for himself, and you know, they don't get the opportunity to do that very often in the mainstream media. But you know, because you know, you're telling a big story, you also can't spend 20 minutes on that, and you know, in a space of a 90-minute film. So that's what's been good about being able to bring them, is they can share that. They can share whatever they want to share, really. So yeah, so they've been pretty involved in the release, and you know, we still get invitations, and if we help facilitate that, our outreach team, that they can be involved. And yeah, so, and it gives them a platform to not only talk about Colton, but to talk about, you know, what they want. And what I think a lot of us want is for this to be looked at with a stronger lens, for there to be an inquiry, for there to be, you know, real structural change in our legal system in Canada. You know, those are the things they're calling for. And so that's, you know, the other thing is the film gives them space to speak about that, because, you know, things stay the same by silencing those of us who, you know, are speaking out against it. And settler colonialism is really, really good at silencing Indigenous people and silencing Black people and silencing all of that. And, you know, film is a way, you know, to counter that.
So there's a really powerful moment in the film in Nîpawistamâsowin when Sheldon says, "I still have a little bit of faith in the legal system. I don't know if the justice system is the right word." And I think you kind of touched on that. Can you talk about your faith or lack of faith in that, and what you've learned in your journey from two worlds colliding to Nîpawistamâsowin?
Yeah. So Sheldon was never intended to really be a character in the film. You know, I knew him from before. We've known each other since we were young, and you know, I knew he'd been chief at one time, and you know, so at that first rally when Stanley made his first appearance, I, you know, saw Sheldon there, and we talked about it, and you know, he said you know, I'm just here to support them, you know, and they'd asked him to speak, you know, because of course they were not able at that point in time, you know, they were, you know, it was so fresh, their grief, and so, you know, I just filmed him because he was speaking, and then, you know, he was there. And it wasn't until the editing, really, you know, because he continued to support the family. Like he would travel with them sometimes, and, you know, just help, you know, help Debbie and help Jade, and be a supportive Indigenous man to these two women who are vocal and powerful, and, you know, and not be threatened by that, you know, you know, which I've congratulated him on. Good for you for like, for, you know, being able to be supportive and stepping back. You know, he started to step back and just let them, you know, whatever. So anyway, it wasn't until editing, you know, and we had put him in the assembly, you know, and then just listening to him, you know, make that change from starting out from a place of faith and no judgment, because that's what we're told. We're told that again and again and again, have faith in the system. And, you know, and we're a kind people, and, you know, we're trusting sometimes, you know, and it's like, okay, we're being told that we can trust the system, and we're being told that things are, you know, so I'm like, he kind of stands in for a lot of us, I think, who grew up being told that the system is fair. You know, it's a legal, it's a justice system. It's justice. It brings justice. And, you know, I think this story and so many other stories have taught us, no, it's a legal system. And, you know, it's flawed, and it's part of settler colonialism, and it's not meant for us. And in fact, it's been used against us from the beginning. And, you know, I think Sheldon's shift is a experience that a lot of people have had, and myself included. You know, when I started Two Worlds Colliding, like, that was my issue, was I'd been raised in pretty relative comfort. I'd been raised to think that the RCMP were there to protect me. You know, all of these Canadian mythologies I was steeped in, as so many are. And then seeing and being confronted with the reality, you know, it is unsettling. And, you know, I had to go through that process in the development stage of the film, to the point where I almost walked. Like, I was so overwhelmed, probably a year in. And I also wasn't very old. And, you know, and I think I was 26 or 27. And I'm like, oh my God, like, it's the pressure. And there was already a lot of bullying happening on the police side, from the union, and so from some within our own Indigenous politics. There was pressure and things like that. So, you know, I at one point was like, it's too much. But my producer was like, take 3 weeks off, don't think about the film, don't make any decisions, you know, and we'll talk at the end of that time. And it was actually, my son's dad and I were together at the time, and he talked to me and he said, you know, because at that point I already had the cooperation of the police, and I had access. I had been given full access to the police. I had a access card that I still have, that I could get in and out of the building whenever I wanted. I could request to go on ride-alongs whenever I wanted. I was able to spend time in the detention center. I was able to bring whoever I wanted with me. And you know, he said to me, he goes, look at me. He's like, you know, and he, long hair and dark, and he's like, they would never let someone like me in that space. And he said, and, you know, the family would never trust a white journalist the way they're trusting you. And he said, you have the ability to go wherever you want to tell this story, and there's not very many people who can do that. And he said, so you have to do this, you have to. And I was like, you're right, okay, you know, I will. And you know, but that's it. Like, it was, you know, and I'm not saying I'm the only one who could have. That's not my intent here. I think that people are put in places, and this is when I teach storytelling or teach filmmaking, I ask the, you know, filmmakers to think about the stories they want to tell. And, you know, why are they, you know, and it isn't that they're the only person that could tell, but what is it about, what are they bringing to be able to do that story justice, right? And that's, I think, what he was trying to tell me is, you know, I'm able to bring these things to telling the story, and you know, the reality of, you know, how I was viewed at the time is, and you know, that I was not seen as a threat, you know. And my age helped with that as well. Like, I was just this girl, like, and that's what everyone called me. Oh, it's that girl who's making a film. It's that girl who's doing this. And you know, and I would just be like, I'm just going to try and tell the story as I see it, you know, and learn as much as I can and tell it from there. And everyone's like, okay, good for you, little girl, you know. So yeah, I think that it is, you know, to go back to your question, I, you know, definitely experienced that shift during that time. And you know, we all go through that at some point, some earlier than others, because, and again, I never judge, because how could we not, when everything around, you know, that's the narrative, and that's the strength of those narratives and mythologies, that Canada continues to replicate and uphold. And, you know, when we listen to our own stories and hear from our own people, you know, we've made the, and we're in a place and time where, and I've seen the difference, like where so many young people are politicized now, and in a good way. Like, you know, people tend to use that, you know, the political, but no, we're aware. You know, our young people are so aware and so vocal, and you know, I see that shift where there were much less people talking about the things we're talking about when I was in my 20s, as I see happening now, and you know, and one of the things I'll say, you know, and the family will say when we're out talking about Nîpawistamâsowin, you know, our young people are so smart and so courageous, and you know, have so much to give, that the people of my generation, our job is sometimes to get out of the way. It's sometimes to hold that space and then move back and let these young people have their voice. And you know, I definitely have hope from that, you know, in those changes that I've seen.
Wow, thanks. I think, you know, given that this platform is the imagineNATIVE Film Festival, there's going to be a lot of Indigenous film folks watching. Something that I wasn't prepared for, and still am trying to navigate, is engaging with the press and the industry as a whole. I know you shared some pretty incredible stories with me candidly about engaging with the Canadian press in particular. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how you navigate the complexities of engaging with the press, especially when some of it is very conservative, right-leaning, white settler Canadian kind of coverage? How do you engage with that, and what sort of lessons do you have to offer for other filmmakers who might be telling challenging stories like yours?
Yeah, so you know, there's a really great book called Seeing Red by Carmen Robertson, who talks about the history of representation of Indigenous people in Canadian mainstream press. And I always wish that all journalists had to read that book, and then have to see the way in which they tell their stories is absolutely informed by, you know, those deeply held stereotypes and biases. And so, you know, yeah, it's been a really interesting process. Because of the way Colton's murder was covered in the press, because of the way that mainstream media did not at all limit the comment sections of their stories, it allowed, you know, the narrative of the white settler farmer protecting his castle to flourish. And so when we started to work on the film and to start to work on the film's release, you know, I said, you know, we're going to make sure that the press is not allowed to re-traumatize the family. Just one second. The press is not going to be allowed to re-traumatize the family. And we're going to try to hold the press accountable to their comment sections. And so we had a great publicist. We because we were a co-production, we were able to hire our own publicist for the film. And, you know, we did work with the NFB publicists, and they're great too, but I wanted to have someone who was just there for us. And so she was really great. And she worked with us from the beginning to have a policy with the interviews we did, where before we would agree to do an interview, we needed to know what their social media monitoring policy was. And the vast majority of them didn't know what that was. And they'd say, oh, well, we'll get back to you. And then they would send another email. And so we would read the policy, and then we would say, okay, we're going to hold you to that. So if you say you're going to monitor comments how regularly, this and that. And, ultimately we have no power over that. But it was, I said, at least they have to think about it. At least they have to be confronted with, what their story puts out there. And, there was a story when the film won the money from hot dogs. The headlines in Saskatchewan were not Indigenous film wins prize. It was Indigenous filmmaker wins money.
Wow.
And I'm like, and this is what I mean by those narratives, right? Because, Indigenous people are not allowed to have money. We're not allowed to thrive. We're not allowed, this is a threat to settler success. If Indigenous people, take any kind of resources, this is a problem. And I've seen, as a, learner of history, I've seen that replicated in lots of different ways. So, and of course, the comments came out, and it was my mom who called, and it was like, they're saying this about you, and they're saying you're, all these things about you. And I'm like, I know, Mom, that's what they do, and I, we're always telling Jade and Debbie, don't read the comments, don't read the comments, just don't, because, and even my son, went on the YouTube for the trailer and then saw all the comments of, racist comments, and started responding to them, and was, trying to argue with these people, and didn't tell me about it for a couple of weeks. And then I was like, you can't be doing that, buddy. These, and he goes, well, I was really upset. He goes, and then I realized these people haven't even seen the film. They don't even know what they're talking about. They're just being racist. And I'm like, exactly. So don't take it on, you have your own things you got to do. So, those sorts of things, I just want the press to be more responsible and to have an awareness of how they are contributing to the rise in racism by A, not being aware of their bias, and B, allowing those comments to live unfettered in the world. So we've really tried to do that. The other thing, is around Jade and Debbie. And, I have been really clear, and our publicist was willing to enforce this, was to not let the press, take that family back to that horrible day. And believe me, they want to so bad that they sneak around it. And we've had this done at the highest level of Canadian media. The bastions of Canadian media programming have tried to do that, have tried to purposefully traumatize this family, to get drama, to get tears, to get, and we've been very careful, and as much, and I've, at one point was like, if this happens, we're done. We're walking. And it was a major program, like the one everybody wants. And it was so and I knew how to ask tough questions, because the publicist helped me do that, where what clips are you playing? What are you going to show? And sure enough, they were showing something that and trying to push this. And I was like, no, that's not all right. And we're not going to do that. And you're not going to play that. And we're not going to respond to it. And I said, are you trying to make Jade cry? Is this what this is about? And they were like, oh, well, we're just, we just want honest emotion. I'm like, then let that happen naturally, and don't blindside her. And Jade and I are in the sound booth together, and she's sitting there looking and then later she says to me, I was just like, are we walking? Just give me the word. Are we walking out of here? And in the end, we negotiated something that was fair, and I just, that's it, to have an understanding and to have compassion of what the family has gone through. And this speaks to any of Indigenous family who, you know, and unfortunately and tragically, you know, families are continuing to have to speak to press and be interviewed on these horrible things that keep happening. You know, that is enough. Like, why add to that through, you know, when they have a message, they have things they want to say, you know, that's enough. You know, don't be trying to make, you know, make a situation that's going to sell newspapers. Just tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would also say, don't have I mean, certain media are pretty obvious how they're going to handle it, but I'll just say we had good experiences with media that leans right, and we've had bad experiences with media that leans left. I think we have to be careful and not let our guard down regardless of, you know, of that, because these biases exist throughout the industry.
And we don't have a lot of time left, but just to go a little bit further in that, did you do media training for Jade, especially the power that she carries and the way that she engages with the press is just it's just so incredible to witness. Did you offer media training to her, and did you take media training yourself?
Yeah, not during the filming. We didn't. You know, what you see and how she engaged in that was her own. I mean, I think she had people helping her, but as the film crew, like we were following, you know. But once we started to promote the film, yeah, our publicist, and part of why she became our publicist is she was so taken with the story that she said, you know, even if you don't choose me, like I'm willing to spend a day with you guys just to help you figure out how to navigate this stuff, because it is going to be a big story and it is going to be tricky. And so we had that. We had her helping us, and then we had a time set up for the entire family. And in the end, something had came up, and Debbie wasn't able to be there. But so yeah, definitely. And it you know, it was really helpful, I think, to you know, to know that you can redirect a question, to know that you can pivot, to know to say the better question is, and say what you want to be asked, and then answer that question, you know. And all of these things have helped a lot as we went through. And, you know, when you make a film about something that is so in the media and is, you know, urgent and, you know, controversial or you know, whatever adjective you want to use, you know, the media is going to be interested. They are going to ask those questions, and sometimes they're not great questions. They're just not, you know, they're not. And you know, they're also coming from a place of a lot of ignorance, and which, you know, we know, right? We know that people are still learning, and so it gives you the ability to be able to get the message that you want from the film. And sometimes that's even, you know, pushing down some expectations, because sometimes, you know, I'll get asked, like, so what's the solution to, you know, every single problem that the film raises? And I'm like, I'm here to tell the story. I'm here to raise these issues and these questions. I'm, you know, that, and there's, I think, a tendency to, you know, put all of this on filmmakers. And absolutely, we can have our ideas and our thoughts and our whatever, but, you know, we're also there to tell this story. And sometimes it means pushing back against these expectations that we're going to have all the answers. You know, I think, you know, I say there are people who've been working in justice and legal reform for decades. Ask them, go talk to them. They've been trying to tell this stuff, you know, they're just not being listened to. You know, so include them in your story. Like, I'm here to tell, as a filmmaker, tell this story of what happened to Colton, tell this story of what happened to this family, to point out the issues that exist and the flaws that exist in our country, but listen to the people, many of whom are Indigenous, who this is their work. And I would suggest, for filmmakers to be aware of that. Like the press they've got to do their homework.
Mm.
Yeah.
I so admire and respect your ability to just be a leader in the way that you work, and the way that you don't adhere to the status quo in terms of the way that you work, and the way that you tell these stories. There's kind of like this notion that we have to just accept that this is the way we do things, and I've learned so much from you and just watching how you work and the many conversations we've had. So thank you for that. We're running out of time. One final question. These stories, Two Worlds Colliding, Birth of a Family, Nîpawistamâsowin, they're about so many things: violence, injustice, and human beings that are impacted by systemic injustice. I know that you've been working on a buffalo film for a long time now, and I know that you kind of got taken away to tell these other stories, and that the buffalo film is related to your doctoral research as well. Can you tell us a little bit about what's next and where that project is at?
So my team and I had said, we would take a year. I would take a year and start next year. And one thing the pandemic did was give me time and forced me to just stop, the way it did all of us. And I started feeling in May, I think, and it's back to that feel, that what I talked about, that I don't know what it is exactly, but it's just something in my body that says now. And it did that with Two Worlds Colliding. It did that with Birth of a Family, and it did that with Nîpawistamâsowin, where it was like, yeah, you're in the right place. It's now. And I had that feeling. So we've gone into development of a feature that is about our relative, the buffalo is our relative, and telling the story of and it's something I've been working on this area for 16 years, as either as through academics or through research, and through building of relationships. And so I'm bringing all of that, the relationships I have with different community leaders and tribes who are working to restore the buffalo, and why, and that it is, a sense of reciprocity that, for Plains people, and the buffalo's range extended really far. So, it's northern people and southwestern people who have this relationship as well, but that, they took care of us, and they, gave us our lives and our livelihood for so long. And, we've been held back, to really work towards supporting them, and that's starting to change. And I want to tell that story. So, yeah, so it's you're right. It's a story I've been wanting to tell. It's been a film in my mind for a good 6 years now. And every time I start, another story will come, and I understand the urgency of those other stories. And I've asked the film to be patient. And so now I'm like, okay, no, I'm saying no to everything else and just doing this one. So, yeah. And then I'm also working to adapt Birth of a Family as a narrative. So we'll see how that goes as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see both of those films, and I'm also really happy that you're able to get back to work on the buffalo film. I think it's going to be such an important film for all of us, especially those of us that come from prairie nations. Myself being Blackfoot, the disappearance of the buffalo, not the disappearance, the sanctioned slaughter of the buffalo had almost irreversible impacts on our people. So I really look forward to seeing that film, and I'm so glad you're doing that important work. Thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. Time flew by so fast. Again, I just love talking to you and love hearing about your process and the way you work. And I just want to say thank you for the work that you do. Your contribution to our community is invaluable, and I know that the work you do is not easy. I know it takes a toll on you, and I just want to say thank you for doing that hard work, and thank you for your bravery. And enjoy the rest of the day, and I look forward to the Q&A later on at the festival.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Tasha. Take care. Oh, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this incredible masterclass with Tasha Hubbard. We have some great questions lined up here. So I think we'll just dive in because we have a very limited amount of time. So the first question is, Tasha, can you speak to the reception of your films by the communities and institutions that are critically examined in them? How did the Saskatoon Police Force worlds colliding? What was the reaction to We Will Stand Up in non-Indigenous prairie community?
Yeah, so you know, it's hard to know around reception unless, you know, you're in the space, because we really try and get the films into the spaces where there's resistance to seeing them, right? I mean, you know, obviously we want a big audience and a supportive audience, and we want the films to screen in Indigenous communities so people can, you know, see their experiences validated, because, you know, the colonial state is so good at gaslighting, and people are constantly told that their perception of the event is wrong, and that things are okay, and everything is fair, and everything is equal, and things are getting better. And you know, meanwhile, day-to-day experience, of course, is telling people otherwise. So the response in the police, you know, I would say they struggled with this, with the film. You know, the police union from the beginning was really, did their best to intimidate me and, you know, influence the film, that sort of thing. You know, I had to deal with police showing up at my address on record on a regular basis to try and arrest me for parking tickets. Granted, I did have quite a few, but I mean, that doesn't warrant the effort that was made to arrest me. And finally, someone told my mother, which was my address on record, you know, you better tell her to pay those tickets. I don't know what she's done, but we're being told at the start of shift to go look for her. And so, you know, there was that kind of a response. But, you know, there were also individual police officers who would see me in the community and recognize me and like quietly come over and express their support, and then look to see who saw them, you know, because that's the culture, right? That's the culture of policing. And, you know, I continued to speak up on issues like carding, and, you know, the intimidation, of course, continued. So there's still a lot of work to be done in prairie police forces and police forces across the country. As far as the reaction to Nîpawistamâsowin in prairie communities, the people who didn't see the film but read it on newspaper, you know, media, or you know, saw the YouTube trailer were quite negative. But the people who actually saw the film, it's actually been positive, and it's been you know, integrated into community group screenings, you know, and sometimes, you know, and sometimes I had to like re-examine my own bias around, you know, well, they're not gonna watch this film. And then, you know, this small town, Saskatchewan town, you know, prairie community group was like, we need to see this film and we need to engage with it and we need to be reflective. So, you know, there's been that as well. But I think there's a resistance to even just watching it. you know, and people kind of sometimes have their minds made up. So that's been the challenge of our outreach team, is especially with COVID now. You know, we had some strategies that we had to put aside, but you know, it's so, I don't know what the answer is to that. You know, it varies, you know. Yeah. I will say we do get a lot of messages from non-Indigenous people in the prairies who are moved by the film, who are self-reflective about their position as profiting from, you know, our erasure. And, you know, those emails and messages, you know, help in terms of why we do what we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. As someone from the prairies, I can say small offerings of hope every now and then. And it's really wonderful to hear that you're getting that sort of reception.
Yeah, for sure.
I certainly wouldn't expect it. Okay, the second question. This conversation is so wonderful. Thank you. Tasha, I'd love to hear more about healing and how, or if you think the film process and medium itself can offer that to your team audiences. Thank you.
I think it depends on how it's approached, you know, and I mean, this is partly why, you know, I've been such a proponent of Indigenous filmmakers being the ones to tell these kinds of stories, because, you know, I have, you know, I'm blessed with mentors. And one of my mentors, when she saw my previous film, Birth of a Family, she said, "You did it. You made a film that told our story and didn't cause more harm to us." You know, that we can have that space to grieve and feel what we're feeling, but we're not re-traumatized. And I thought a lot about that in how I was conceptualizing the film and how I was going to, you know, put, you know, it's why the boys are in the film. And it's not that the family story needs to be told, and it's absolutely integral and important. And it's just, you know, it can be really heavy, you know, and we need those spaces to breathe. We need those spaces to rest and have spaces of hope and feel the love we have for each other. And, you know, the family of Colton, you know, were the first ones to, you know, ask the crew, "Are you guys taking care of yourself? Are you okay? Do you have support?" Because they had learned that that's what they needed, right? And they wanted us to have that too. So, you know, I think if films are done in a, you know, in a good way with that thought in mind, you know, then yes, I think it can be healing to, as I go back to the gaslighting comment, you know, if you've been treated, you know, this way, and no one's listened to you, and no one, you know, the wider society tells you, "Oh, you're just, you know, you're just making it up," or, you know, whatever it happens to be, the dismissal, right? The minimization, that has its own trauma. And so, you know, for people to see that, and, you know, that happened with Two Worlds Colliding for years after I had Indigenous men, you know, see the film, see me there, and come and tell me, like, that happened to me, and just be moved that their experience was reflected and believed, you know. And that's why it was so powerful when Daryl Knight said, like, he believed me, that officer believed me, you know. And that's, you know, that's where you know, that disbelief can cause harm. And it's a refusal to believe. It's not, you know, it's a refusal to believe that the state works this way, that police work this way. And, you know, because the narrative is so different.
Yeah, I think validating people's experiences like that can have a profound effect.
Mm-hmm.
Third question, Tasha, you dealt with such sensitive subjects so respectfully that honors the stories shared. What are some of the protocols that you take on set for things to be done in a good way?
Yeah, so you know, I'm really careful who I work with, and you know, I especially on a film like that deal with such hard subjects, and you know, it really is about creating this space with ourselves, but also with the people in the film. And you know, and we do that, whether it's our core crew, our core, my DP, who's also my producer, our sound, and whoever, we had a number of people help, especially when we were on the road, and yourself included, you came out and supported us. But, we were filming in places like Ottawa and New York, and we couldn't bring our own sound person. And so we actually took a lot of time, like, who is this person? Who are they as a person? Yes, they have to have their skills, but who are they as a person? Because I didn't want the family to ever feel that they weren't supported by us too. And so we were so lucky. We found really wonderful people all the way through. So that's part of it. I think I also really encourage us to talk to each other about what we're experiencing, because, that night of the verdict, I mean, the crew felt it. The crew felt the animosity from those farmers and people who were circling the courthouse and revving their engines and being intimidating. And it was a new experience for some of them, who were non-Indigenous men who are not used to being on the receiving end of that. And, and of course they didn't even want to tell me, because they're like, this is so minute in the big scale of things, but I do say, like, we for us to be strong and be able to do our work and be in these spaces, we need to be open. And and I think that the other issue is, for the family is just that, like I said, having people around them that support them, lots of conversation, lots of listening. I'm a slow filmmaker. I don't if I can help it, I don't bring the camera in for quite a while. And I just Alanis has been a proponent of that, and she records sound. I don't even record sound. I just listen and visit and try to get to know, and what are the things there. It's around an understanding and trust building, and also being very clear that this is what the film can do. This is what it can't do. This is what the story will, can do for this issue and for the families, and it's not a solution. It's a tool, to have their voices heard and to have this story told without the colonial bias that runs throughout so much of our media. So, yeah.
Yeah, and on those few days that I was able to help out, it was so apparent that you had built that relationship and that sense of trust with Jade and Debbie and Eleanor. And I have to say that I was so emotionally exhausted at the end of those 3 days, just witnessing the family's grief and everything that they had to, all the work that they had to do. And so I just have to say I have so much respect for how much emotional labor you put into that for years, and the respect and the love that you built in that relationship with the family. Next question. How would you encourage people to start examining their own biases, such as perceiving Indigenous boys as men or Indigenous men as inherently dangerous? What questions should people ask them?
Well, this is where people need to do homework. And it starts by just asking the question, if I see people that way, why? What has taught me to view, Indigenous men and boys through that lens? And so part of that homework is learning about what stereotypes are and what they do and how they function. And, I'm actually, in my other hat as a professor at the U of A, in the Faculty of Native Studies, I'm actually developing an online course on stereotypes, because it was put to me that people can understand and identify them, but rarely do we go, why has this stereotype been around for 400 years? And some of the stereotypes around our people have their roots from those early days of contact. And why have they survived to now? And who is benefiting from them? Who is invested in them? Who, and what are the ideas and concepts that underpin that? And so that takes some homework. That takes people making that effort to read and research and think. and do the reflection, you know, around their, you know, their own experiences and when they might have had that same response, you know, when they might have, you know, crossed the street to avoid encountering an Indigenous person, or believed somebody when they were told, oh, you know, don't go to that neighborhood, you know, this and that, like all of those sorts of, you know, narratives that come out. So yeah, I would just say people need to do the work.
And there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
I wish I could take that course. I think Verney does a really great job of unpacking the stereotype of the dangerous, violent, sort of predatory Black man in 13th, and all of the damage that that stereotype has done, and where it comes from. Question number 5. Why would you, or what would you do if your vision of the story doesn't correspond to the version of the people involved? How would you negotiate that? Which version would you privilege? And could you make a film about something that you see in a very different way to the people directly involved? It's a good question.
Yeah. Well, I would say I don't approach stories with a really solid vision at the beginning. Like my vision is a long time coming, and that's, you know, why I take a long time, because, you know, and I think that has a bit of origin when I started working in film. I, you know, as an adoptee I came back to my family. I found them when I was 16. And so I spent, you know, 5, 6, 7 years just getting to know my family, getting, you know, learning my own, you know, my own history, visiting, you know, that sort of thing. And in my mid-20s, when I started working in documentary, the reason I was so excited about it was I was like, I can learn about this history, you know, and sort of take people along with that learning, you know, by using film as a medium. But I also felt that I need to be sure that I have a really good understanding of what is going on. And so with Two Worlds Colliding, like I spent 2 years in development. I spent many weekends going on ride-alongs with the police because I realized I didn't know what a Friday night looked like in Saskatoon at 2 a.m, 3 a.m. You know, I didn't know what the police encountered. I knew and I was also in the process of unpacking the mythology around police that I had grown up with being adopted into, you know, into a white community where, and having mainstream education, you know, where Mounties are heroes and, you know, all of that sort of thing. But I also took the time to spend time with the families of the victims and talk to the lawyers and try and learn the law a little bit, and, you know, really just know like the research process. And I had 2 amazing researchers who did this amazing, you know, history of policing, because I'm like, you know, what's at the core of our contemporary policing force? And I didn't know they originated from paramilitary forces, and, you know, and I hadn't really fully unpacked the myth of the RCMP and the Northwest Mounted Police and how that factors into municipal policing as well. So by the time I started, I had a pretty good sense of things. And, you know, I had a good sense of, I want people to be heard. And I needed to have a really good idea of how colonialism worked and how it protects itself and how it replicates. And, you know, I did a master's degree while I was editing, and that helped so much because I was taking, you know, decolonizing education classes from, you know, Verna St. Denis and Marie Baptiste and others, and yeah, unpacking that. So I do find that you know, by the time I'm making the film, my vision and version as an Indigenous person will look very different than, you know, a settler who's very entrenched in their privilege and has never had to think about or wanted to think about how they've benefited from, you know, the dispossession, oppression of Indigenous people. I'm okay when you know, when I'm putting forward a perspective that's not going to agree with that. You know, I feel that responsibility to my community to have them be heard. And provide that space for them to say what it is they, I think where I come up with my vision is in editing, where I've now had all of these pieces, and then my job is to kind of put that together, with a sense of well, one of the first words my dad taught me when I was getting to know him was Nîpawistamâsowin, which people often translate as truth, but it's actually the truth as I know it, the truth that I can best know given what I've learned in my experiences, and I, that's my guide but I do the work to get a sense of what that is, what are all of the different elements here, and then bring that together. Yeah, but as far so as far as the subjects in my film, especially the Indigenous subjects, it's what they've told me, it's what they've shared with me is what I'm going to put in the film. Yeah.
And that's very clear, especially with birth of a family.
Yeah,
I've loved those conversations with you and just hearing about that process.
Yeah, and they have to have agency, they do, and that kind of goes against Western doc traditions, where the filmmaker gets to say whatever they want, kind of thing. And I'm being facetious, but I definitely, there in that film in particular, there was that collaboration around what were their boundaries. I never assumed that I had the right to tell the stories that they didn't want to tell. The film can still be about their experience and this literal birth of this little family that they were trying to create. So yeah, I think that we've been so misrepresented that it's important to listen and understand what the people in your film are hoping for, and being honest about what your limitations are and what your goals are. Because people can be trusting, and so we do have that responsibility. Yeah.
And people change as well. Something I've thought a lot about in terms of documentary is that, someone's experience or where they're at in life in that moment that you're filming them can be drastically different from where they're at 10 years from now. And once that's on film and you put it out into the world, it can't ever be changed. So it's a huge responsibility. It's a lot. We have just a few minutes left. That's it for audience questions. I have one more question, which is what's next for you? What's the next project or projects?
Well, I have a few things. I live in Alberta now, but I'm from Saskatchewan, so I'm really in the prairies. It can be challenging to make films and to make films with larger budgets. I've been really fortunate. My mentors where I learned filmmaking were already making larger films, so that's what I learned to do. But it can be tough to do that. And so, I'm hoping I've got a couple of projects where I'm collaborating, with emerging Indigenous filmmakers. I don't know what that role will be for me exactly, but I just want to sort of help provide space for that. So yeah, we'll see. I don't want to say too much about those because they're in the very early stages, but I'm working to adapt Birth of a Family to a narrative. So it will be the premise of what the family did, but different characters and different, so it's not, we're not fictionalizing Betty Ann and Ben and all these people. We're starting over with the characters, but keeping the premise of what they did. And so they're supportive of that. And then I've been working for a long time on, and my heart's film is looking at our relationship to buffalo. So we're in the formal process now, and we've been successful with our development, and hope to start next summer. And I've been filming really important stories that have already happened, and you know, it's my research work in my academic hat. So I'm really excited, you know, these stories that I've been told, and you know, to be able to bring them to the screen. So yeah.
Well, I can't wait to see them. I know you've been working on the Buffalo film for a very long time, and
Yeah.
Birth of a Family and Nîpawistamâsowin both kind of happened
Mm-hmm.
in a sense. So you're able to return to that. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much for everything you offered. It's been such a wonderful conversation. I could listen to you talk all day. And yeah, it's been an absolute privilege. Thanks to imagineNATIVE for putting this event together, and to the audience for joining and all these wonderful questions. And I look forward to joining in on these other conversations. The rest of the festival, everybody.
Yeah, I wish we were all together. Yeah.
Me too. It's so weird, but it's wonderful that it's working out in this way.
Yeah.
Okay, take care.
Okay, thank you.